What's up everyone and welcome back to the World History channel. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button today. Let's get started. Tycho Brahe, the bizarre 16th century astronomer who owned a psychic dwarf slave. Who was Tycho Brahe? Even if you haven't heard his distinctive name, you know his work. One of history's most influential astronomers, the Danish scientist lived and worked in the mid-16th century. His contributions to the field included the discovery of supernovae and work on the properties of comets. But while Brahe's work in astronomy is recognized, the man doesn't get enough credit for his incredible and often ludicrous biography. Some of the facts about Tycho Brahe are hard to believe. He led the sort of life that, if it had been lived by a fictional character, would have been deemed too unrealistic. Proving that truth is often stranger than fiction, Brahe walked a bizarre path from birth until his tragic death, which, coincidentally, may have inspired a famous work of literature. Tycho Brahe made a definite impact on the scientific world, but given the countless crazy details surrounding him, it's a wonder he isn't discussed more often. Read on to discover more about this fascinating historical figure. He lost his nose in a duel over math. In 1566, Brahe and a colleague got into a heated argument about math. The two agreed that the only way to settle their disagreement was with a duel, which Brahe lost when his opponent took off a chunk of his nose. The astronomer wore a metal covering over it for the rest of his life. He partied with his prized pet moose. Brahe's choice of pet can charitably be called eccentric. A moose. Brahe adored his moose. It slept in his house like a dog, and reportedly trotted alongside his carriage. Unfortunately, the unusual creature became a fixture at local parties, where it developed a taste for beer. It had a little too much one day, fell down the stairs drunk, and died from its injuries later. He had a psychic jester. Brahe's frequent companion, Jep, was a dwarf jester. The astronomer had Jep perform all manner of jokes and tricks for him, and made him sit under the table during meals for reasons that are probably best left unknown. Brahe was convinced that Jep had psychic and precognitive abilities. He wore copper, gold, and silver noses. After losing a portion of his nose in a duel, the wealthy Brahe commissioned a number of ornate fake noses, including some for special occasions. He wore a copper nose most of the time, but reportedly swapped in gold and silver coverings whenever the situation called for them. He was stolen by his uncle. Many historical figures had a troubled childhood, but most of them weren't abducted by an uncle and had parents who were totally cool with that fact. Such was the bizarre origin story of Tycho Brahe. His rich uncle, Jörgen Brahe, was childless and decided to take his sibling's boy for himself in 1548. After the initial shock wore off, Brahe's birth parents decided that Jörgen would probably provide a better life for their son, and left their child with him. The wealthy Jörgen did pay for all of his nephew's schooling. He inherited 1% of Denmark's wealth. After the death of his uncle Father Jörgen, Brahe had inherited both Jörgen's considerable wealth and that of his biological father. Those fortunes added up. Researchers estimate that Brahe's inheritances added up to approximately 1% of Denmark's entire wealth. It was believed that the king had killed him. Brahe was a popular man with the Danish royal family. While his astronomical fame brought him plenty of notoriety, he also gained favor when his adopted father saved the Danish king from drowning. This brought Brahe into the royals' inner circle, where he befriended the king and became close with his family. Too close, if rumors are to be believed. Some historians suggest that Brahe began an affair with the queen, metal nose and all. If that's true, then perhaps the queen's son had Brahe poisoned when he took the throne. He possibly inspired Hamlet. Tycho Brahe's amazing life may have inspired William Shakespeare. The bard seemed to be aware of the tale of Brahe, as he referenced the Danish astronomer's work in his plays. Some even believe that the intrigue and mystery surrounding Brahe's death may have sparked Shakespeare to write Hamlet. Brahe became close with the Danish royal family, and some historians believe he may have had an affair with the queen. They theorize that her son, enraged by the scandal, poisoned Brahe in revenge, a similar story to the plot of Shakespeare's tragedy. He may have been poisoned by Johannes Kepler. Some historians theorize that Brahe was murdered in the name of science. One of Brahe's contemporaries was Johannes Kepler, another incredibly influential astronomer. Kepler was dissatisfied with Brahe's habit of hoarding his research and data, and some believe that Brahe may have planned to kill his mentor. There's no evidence to support this theory, although Kepler did admit to skirting ethics by taking Brahe's research upon his death. His adopted father died saving the king from drowning. Even the people around Brahe ended up in crazy situations. His adopted father Jørgen was an extremely wealthy man and close to the King of Denmark, Frederick II. He was so close, in fact, that he was on hand when the king nearly drowned one day. Jørgen bravely attempted to rescue his monarch, and he succeeded, but he caught pneumonia and died. Brahe lost his father figure, but gained even more national notoriety in Denmark, as he found himself ingratiated with the royal family. He died from a burst bladder. Brahe's death is as outrageous as the rest of his life. He likely died from a burst bladder. As the story goes, he was attending a royal banquet in 1601. Politeness kept Brahe from leaving the room to use the facilities, and his bladder ruptured, ultimately killing him. However, rumors swirled for years that the celebrated astronomer was actually murdered, either by a jealous colleague or the royal family itself. A study of Brahe's exhumed remains ultimately laid these conspiracies to rest. His astronomy career kicked off with a solar eclipse. Brahe wasn't even supposed to be an astronomer. His adopted father wanted him to study law. However, when a total eclipse of the sun happened in 1560, the young Brahe was inspired to dedicate his life to the study of the stars. He built the Uraniborg Astronomy Castle. Named after Urania, the muse of astronomy, Brahe's private observatory was built between 1576 and 1580. Construction was bankrolled by King Frederick II of Denmark, who was eager to keep the talented scientist from resettling in another country. It included numerous sophisticated apparatus to assist with Brahe's astronomical observations, but not a telescope, as those hadn't been invented at the time. Despite this disadvantage, Brahe was able to observe the planets and stars with unprecedented precision with the assistance of up to 30 assistants, creating the first truly trustworthy body of astronomical data. Unfortunately, Christian IV, Frederick's successor, did not like Brahe and stopped supporting his activities. In 1597, Brahe left the location, and Uraniborg was demolished shortly after. He hoarded his research. Brahe came to be applauded for his scientific research, but the depth of his understanding wasn't always appreciated by others during his time. But it was his fault, as he notoriously hoarded his findings to avoid sharing any recognition with his fellow astronomers. He furthered science by dying. In the end, Brahe was likely more important in death than he was in life. Other astronomers, including Johannes Kepler, gained access to Brahe's data after he passed away, which enabled them to make several revolutionary discoveries about the cosmos. Kepler in particular is credited with bringing astronomy fully into the realm of science, and he couldn't have done so without Brahe's foundational work. Tycho Brahe might not be a household name today, but in the 16th century, he was the closest thing to a scientific rock star Denmark had ever seen. A man of aristocratic lineage, eccentric habits, and scientific genius who played an outsized role in shaping the world's understanding of the cosmos. However, as monumental as his astronomical discoveries were, like identifying supernovae and tracking comets, what makes Brahe a singularly fascinating historical figure isn't just what he discovered in the stars, but how incredibly weird, lavish, and borderline unbelievable his life on Earth was. This was a man who wore a prosthetic nose made of gold and silver after losing the real one in a drunken duel over a math equation. He owned a private island, built a castle devoted to astronomy, had a pet moose that died from falling downstairs while drunk, and, perhaps most infamously, kept a so-called psychic dwarf named Jep as his court jester, who was made to sit under the dinner table and allegedly predicted the future. Instead of reading like a biography, Brahe's story reads more like a surrealist novel, with all of the oddities and excesses of Renaissance Europe amplified. Yet beneath all the lunacy lay a deeply influential scientist whose meticulous data laid the groundwork for Johannes Kepler's planetary laws, and, ultimately, for modern astronomy. Born in 1546 to a wealthy Danish noble family, Brahe was technically kidnapped as a toddler by his uncle Jørgen, a wealthy court official who was childless and apparently decided he'd just go ahead and raise Tycho himself. Surprisingly, neither of his parents voiced much opposition. To be fair, they weren't entirely wrong if they thought that their son would have a better future thanks to Jørgen's substantial wealth. Jørgen did, after all, fund Brahe's education, pushing him toward law, but young Tycho had other ideas. In 1560, during a solar eclipse that astronomers had successfully predicted, the 14-year-old Brahe was so impressed that he dropped everything and committed himself to astronomy. He bought books and instruments with money meant for legal texts while studying the stars in secret and doing so in front of his adoptive father. Tycho's passion for the cosmos didn't just blossom, it exploded. His career was marked by his obsession with precision, which also fed into his more eccentric side. He eventually became so obsessed with measurements that he would collect data obsessively, often hoarding it away from colleagues for fear they'd steal his glory. He even refused to publish large portions of his findings during his lifetime. However, Tycho's flamboyant persona was already making waves long before his data changed the way astronomy was done. In 1566, Tycho and a fellow student got into a heated argument about a math formula. Because this was the Renaissance and ego was everything, they decided to settle the dispute not with a calculator but with swords. The result? Brahe got his nose sliced off. Never one to let a mutilation go to waste, he crafted an elaborate collection of metal prostheses, copper for everyday use, gold or silver for special occasions. These weren't just vanity. In a strange way, the metal nose became his signature. He wore it with pride, as though the injury itself was a badge of intellectual passion. His eccentricity only grew as his fame spread. By the 1570s, Brahe was an intellectual celebrity across Europe, and he caught the attention of King Frederick II of Denmark. Recognizing Brahe's talent and perhaps his entertainment value, the king gifted him the island of Hven and funded the construction of Uraniborg, an astronomer's paradise that was half science laboratory and half Renaissance pleasure palace. Think of it as the Hogwarts of astronomy, complete with libraries, observatories, and alchemical labs, but no telescopes because they hadn't been invented yet. Tycho and his team of up to 30 assistants used intricate sextants, quadrants, and armillary spheres to map the heavens with unprecedented accuracy. Tycho ruled Uraniborg like a scientific monarch for nearly 2 decades. But as impressive as his work was, his day-to-day life was even more bizarre. Brahe kept a psychic dwarf named Jep as part of his entourage, treating him like a cross between a jester, a servant, and a fortune-teller. Jep reportedly had clairvoyant powers and was made to sit under the dinner table during meals, whether as a superstition, a prank, or just part of Brahe's twisted sense of courtly ritual. Jep wasn't just a curiosity to Brahe. He was, in his own way, a cherished companion, though one in a deeply unequal and ethically troubling relationship. Whether Jep was a slave, a pet, or an indentured jester is unclear, but it's a reminder that even celebrated figures like Brahe participated in social hierarchies that would now be seen as exploitative and dehumanizing. And Jep wasn't the only non-human member of Brahe's inner circle. One of Brahe's most notorious companions was a tame elk, or moose, depending on the translation, a massive, horned creature that wandered his castle freely and often accompanied him to parties. This regal animal had a penchant for beer, which Brahe thought was hilarious, at least until the poor beast got drunk, fell down a staircase, and died of its injuries. One can't help but imagine the bewildered expressions of visiting scientists as they dined in a castle where a psychic dwarf peeked out from under the table, and a moose inebriated itself on ale. Tycho Brahe was many things. Genius, aristocrat, party animal. But above all, he was a man deeply invested in spectacle. He inherited a staggering amount of wealth, by some estimates around 1% of Denmark's total economy at the time, thanks to his birthright and his uncle Jørgen, who died while heroically saving King Frederick II from drowning. This act of loyalty earned Brahe royal favor, but that cozy relationship wouldn't last forever. After Frederick's death, his successor, Christian IV, had little patience for Brahe's increasingly erratic behavior and expensive whims. When Christian cut funding to Uraniborg in the late 1590s, Brahe was essentially kicked out of Denmark, forced to seek refuge in Prague under the patronage of the Holy Roman Emperor. It was in Prague that Brahe teamed up with a younger, equally brilliant astronomer named Johannes Kepler. The two had a complicated, often tense relationship. Brahe was possessive of his data, while Kepler was eager to use it to prove his own theories. After Brahe's sudden death in 1601, allegedly due to a burst bladder after refusing to leave a royal banquet to use the toilet, Kepler seized the opportunity. He took Brahe's hoarded data and used it to formulate the laws of planetary motion that would revolutionize astronomy and lay the foundation for Newtonian physics. And what about Brahe's death? Officially, yes, burst bladder. But rumors of foul play began swirling almost immediately. Some claimed that Brahe had been poisoned, possibly by Kepler, who stood to gain immensely from the data. Others believed that the Danish royal family had something to do with it, perhaps as revenge for a rumored affair between Brahe and Queen Sophie, the wife of King Frederick II. Although later forensic analysis of his exhumed remains found trace levels of mercury, they weren't high enough to confirm deliberate poisoning. Still, the mystery continues to titillate historians and conspiracy theorists alike. Tycho Brahe's life was so fantastical, so strange, and so filled with oddities that it's easy to lose sight of his actual scientific legacy. But make no mistake, his contributions were crucial. He helped destroy the Aristotelian model of the universe, provided evidence that the heavens were not unchanging, thanks to his observation of supernovae, and gathered reams of data that enabled the Copernican revolution to finally take root. In a cosmic twist of irony, it was his death that pushed the field of astronomy into a new era. Brahe may not have lived to see the full impact of his work, but in giving Kepler the tools to rewrite our understanding of the solar system, he ensured his name would echo through history. That is, if people can look past the drunken moose, metal nose, and psychic dwarf long enough to appreciate it. Saturday Night Live has been on NBC since 1975, entertaining the masses while offering weekly commentary and interpretations of current, past, and even future events. During the show's tenure, SNL skits have highlighted the inconsistencies, injustices, or contradictions of major events, and provided much-needed comic relief in the process. Sometimes SNL sketches are ridiculous to the point of absurdity. On other occasions, SNL manages to depict historical events with an uncanny sense of realism. On SNL, impressions of politicians and celebrities accompany pokes at everyday actions, behaviors, and attitudes. A healthy mix of these can be found in countless sketches about historical events, some of which you can find discussed below. Vogue. Simpson trial. Photo NBC. 1. Vogue. Simpson trial. The historic moment. Simpson was believed to have slain his former wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and her associate Ron Goldman, outside of Brown Simpson's home on June 12, 1994. This event set off a famous car chase and well-publicized trial, one that featured a dream team of defense attorneys and famous phrases like, "If it doesn't fit, you must acquit." The trial began in January 1995. Many notable witnesses took the stand during the proceedings, including Los Angeles police detective Mark Furman, Simpson's friend Kato Kalin, and criminologist Dennis Fung. Because the trial was aired on cable television and was covered extensively by the media, people could tune in to see how it unfolded in real time. In October 1995, the trial came to an end and O.J. The charges against Simpson were not brought against him. The sketch. SNL used the O.J. Simpson trial for comedic fodder throughout its run, taking on the procedural absurdities rather than the crimes in question. Parodies of Court TV's coverage of the trial mock witnesses such as Kalin, David Spade, and reference attempts by Simpson's defense team to curry favor with jurors. The trial of O.J. Weekend Update host Norm Macdonald never shied away from making jokes about Simpson during his nearly 9-month tenure. At the time, Macdonald believed Simpson was guilty and claims he was fired for his relentless digs at the former football star. After the jury acquitted Simpson, Macdonald joked, "Well, it's official. Murder is now legal in the state of California. The historic moment. The terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001, shocked the world. People were left feeling sad, confused, angry, scared, and a plethora of other emotions after planes crashed into the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., the World Trade Center in New York, and the World Trade Center in New York City. In the days, weeks, and months after September 11th, the death toll rose, questions remained unanswered, and the global public tried to understand exactly what happened. The sketch. As a show filmed in New York City, SNL aired its first post-9/11 episode less than 3 weeks after the event. The show had Alicia Keys as the musical guest and was hosted by actress Reese Witherspoon as the first episode of the 27th season. SNL used Rudy Giuliani, the mayor of New York at the time, as well as members of the NYPD, NYFD, and other first responders in the cold opening to provide some humor and inspiration. Before the episode continued, musician Paul Simon also made an appearance, playing the role of the boxer. Throughout the entire show, SNL offered satirical commentary and silly jokes alike. SNL continued to include 9/11-related content for subsequent seasons, most notably through Will Ferrell's Patriotic Shorts skit, which made statements about the fervent patriotism in the United States. In the skit, which first aired on October 6, 2001, Ferrell's character takes advantage of the relaxed dress code at his workplace, now opened up to allow employees to demonstrate their love of country through their attire, by wearing an American flag bikini-style swimsuit and a crop-top shirt proudly displaying USA in red, white, and blue. In yet another bid to provide comedic escape, Ferrell's Gus Chiggins' Old Prospector sketch brought the pan-toting folksy scout to life later that same October. Ferrell was so funny that his fellow cast members broke repeatedly, but as indicated in the sketch, unconventional war draws unconventional participants. The historic moment. Operation Desert Storm, the combat phase of the 1990 to 1991 First Gulf War, was a response to Iraq's invasion of Kuwait in 1990. After 6 weeks of air attacks led by the United States, coalition forces launched a brief ground campaign. The end result was a liberated Kuwait, although Saddam Hussein, Iraq's leader, remained in power. The sketch. As Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney, Phil Hartman opens a Desert Storm press conference to an inquisitive batch of reporters. Cheney gives the podium to Lieutenant Colonel William Pearson, Kevin Nealon, who gives no real information. However, despite Cheney's repeated assertions that they would not provide any insights into U.S. actions or Iraqi weaknesses, the reporters ask questions that would expose U.S. military strategy to the Iraqis. The SNL cold open took on the absurdities of military briefings and media coverage alike.